Screams filled the silo, as the fire rose and what looked like a creature emerged from the shadow of that fire. The 4 teens yelled in fear from what they saw. They quickly gathered themselves and ran out of the silo, leaving their friend behind. As one of the young girls turned back before exiting, she saw what looked like a long blade strike the throat of her friend. Was it a blade, or rather a long nail of the creature? The train roared its way through town as the 4 teens ran out of the silo. The horn of the train blared as it hid the screams and yells of the teenagers. They ran as far as they could before they had to collect their breaths. They swore themselves to secrecy, that they would never speak of this night. They would not speak of it to themselves, nor anyone else. Had the creature they saw be real, or was merely a figment of their imagination? Maybe it was their minds processing a monster rather than a man. They would not speak of it ever again. However, the time would come when their friend would be discovered. When that happens, what story would they tell? The night would soon end. The mystery of this night gave way to the rising sun. The sun rises over this small town as it has many times before. It rises over the cul-de-sac, and a new day has began. Early Monday morning in the small town of Candy Water. It's the year 1997, cell phones are a rarity, and the internet makes a dial tone sound when you connect to it. Fine times in that day. In a small town of 700 people, life is easy, to a certain extent. Most people work out of town, mostly in the town of Daughter. No one complains about working out of town cause Candy Water is the ideal town, and no one ever's expect for tragedy to fall on this town. Joe Rivera Sr. is finally on vacation. It's been a year and a half of straight work. This vacation is well deserved. He stands outside drinking coffee and admiring his nice, well taken care of green grass and maintained yard. In fact, Joe looks around and sees all the beautiful yards in his cul-de-sac neighborhood. Next to Joe's house is the Rios residence. Their yard is on the left and is nice, but not as nice as Joe's. Directly in front of Joe's house is the Gonzalez residence. That yard is great. Joe knows that Michael Gonzalez and his wife Angie take the yard very serious, and you can tell by the quality of their yard. Only their yard is not the best in the block. No, that distinguished title belongs to Bill Waltz, the old retired man that lives at the end of the cul-de-sac. Bill's yard is an artist landscape, one that is enjoyed by many and is absolutely hated him by Michael. Then there is the house to the right of Joe's house. The residence belongs to the Lance family. No one really knows anything about the family. They moved in 6 months ago and have never introduced themselves to any of the neighbors. In fact, no one even knows how many are in the family. What is visible about the family is their yard, or rather lack thereof. Instead of green grass throughout the yard, there is patches of yellow and burnt grass, along with dirt throughout it. Dead and rooted plants from the previous owners still remain in the ground. Joe always looks over to the Lance yard and wonders how they can let their yard look like that. A bad yard is not the only problem with that family. Sometimes late at night they make loud sounds. Not music, but some weird loud whistling and mechanical sounds. The sounds don't last long, but it's enough to wake up those nearby. Joe always looks over and can't help but wonder just what the heck is going on over there. Oh well, Joe goes back into the house to grab another cup of coffee. His wife Rita is making breakfast and Joe Jr., the son, is getting ready for school. Joe Jr. is thrilled, not about going to school but rather that it is almost spring break. Just today and Friday, then the whole week off. A whole week to play video games and hang out with his close friends. Joe Jr. has a group of 3 friends that he closely hangs out with. There's Rick Rios that lives next door. Steve Gonzalez, that is also his neighbor. Then there is Ryan Cortez. All 4 of the boys are the same age at 14 and are freshmen in high school. Joe Jr. has known Rick and Steve all his life as they live close together. Ryan has been a friend of theirs for the past 6 years. They all share the same interest and are best friends. Joe Jr. grabs a biscuit and bacon and gives his mom a kiss on the cheek. He grabs his books and pats his dad on the back as he heads out the door. Joe Jr. meets Rick and Steve in the front yard, and they head to school. The school was only 2 blocks down, and when temperatures aren't too hot, they walk to their school. The school isn't big. There is probably about 150 kids total in the high school. Joe Sr. was about to dig into his breakfast, when out of the corner of his eye he sees something moving in the backyard. Joe walks over to the window and spots Ray Rios creeping through his backyard. It appears Ray has a camera and binoculars. Joe notices that Ray is looking in the direction of the Lance house. Just what the hell is Ray doing, Joe thinks to himself. Joe walks over to the back door. Ray, what the hell are you doing back here? Joe asked. Hey Joe, I was just, well, never mind, you guys got breakfast in there? Ray asked. Joe invites Ray inside the house. Rita sees Ray and starts to serve him a plate. Before anyone speaks, they decide to eat. Rita made a big breakfast: scrambled eggs, bacon, sausage links, pancakes along with biscuits and toast. After 10 minutes of eating their delicious breakfast and topping it off with coffee, Ray breaks the silence. Thanks for the breakfast, it was delicious. What you doing home, Joe? Aren't you usually at work at this time? Ray asks. Yeah, I would be at work, but I took a vacation. I needed some time off, felt like I was burning out already. So what you guys going to do for vacation? Are you guys going to head up to Lake Town? No, not this time. We are going to stay here. Joe feels like staying here and vacation in the backyard, Rita says sarcastically. Really? The backyard? Good luck with the backyard with those weirdos for neighbors, Ray says. Yeah, those neighbors. Have you seen or talked to them by any chance? Joe asked Ray. No, I haven't seen or talked to them. In fact, I don't think anyone has. Kind of makes you wonder what they eat over there. I mean, have you seen a delivery made over there? I spoke to the realtor that sold them the place. She said it was a private firm that made the purchase on their behalf. I don't know, Joe, but those people, they seem really weird. Have you heard the noises at night? Yeah, I've heard the noise. I don't know what it could be. But it certainly sounds strange, Joe says. Strange, it's just downright creepy, Joe. They also don't come out and associate. These people are weirdos, Ray says. Strange, yes, but I wouldn't call them weirdos. They probably just want to stick to themselves. When the Flores family lived there, I barely had any interaction with them, Joe says. Yeah, the Flores family stuck to themselves and didn't interact, but they were normal. I mean, they came outside, they went shopping, and they worked on their yard. Heck, they had a yard to work on, and they didn't go making weird-ass noises at night, Ray says. Well, maybe next time we hear the noise we should call the sheriff, Joe says. Oh yeah, Joe, let's go ahead and call Sheriff Goldilocks and see what he does, Ray says sarcastically. Goldilocks, damn, that's a good one, Ray. But I believe his name is James, yeah, Ron James. Ron James, he was appointed as sheriff over the town of Candy Water. He is not the elected sheriff, but was appointed by the elected sheriff. Ron James came from the big city of St. Anthony. He was on the police force for over 10 years before coming to Christ Bay. With his experience, the elected sheriff gave him the opening in Candy Water. Sheriff James runs the office with his one deputy. He is also the only male in town with blonde hair. A small town like Candy Water doesn't need a big police force. The only crimes around the area are the occasional rowdy neighbor and some missing lawn furniture and lawn mowers. Other than that, it's mostly traffic stops that involve out-of-towners speeding through here. There are no traffic lights in Candy Water, and is the reason why so many people speed their way through it. But every so often, they are called over to the school for fights. But that doesn't happen so often. At the school, the final bell rings, and the boys find themselves in class before the tardy bell. One of the benefits of a small town is small classes and having all your friends for the same class. First period is history class for the boys. Their minds are far from school and on spring break coming up. They have their week planned out and can't wait to start it. A big week is coming up for the boys. A week full of watching scary movies and playing video games. There are several new games about to be released, and they have already placed a reservation on them. Today, their minds were far away from history class and further away from anything involving school. What is not too far from school, about 2 miles down the road, are the grain elevators. The town was surrounded by farmland. They would harvest corn, wheat, cotton, and sunflower. For those that worked in town, it was either with farmers or with the grain companies. Maintenance had been scheduled on the grain silos. It was the yearly maintenance. This time of the year, the silos are empty. They're getting ready for their spring harvest. Each silo would be cleaned out and inspected for any insects or bacterial disease. Jeff Winslow would be in charge of cleaning and inspecting the west silo. Jeff went into the silo, and his life changed forever. Jeff made a gruesome discovery inside the silo. Inside was a teenage girl with her neck split open. The body looked lifeless. Jeff ran out of the silo, yelling and screaming in horror. He made his way over to the main office and called the sheriff's office. Dawn Garcia was working the phone that day. She answered the phone and took Jeff's call. Sheriff James was in his office. He was talking to his deputy, Robert Garza. The two had sat down to drink some coffee and eat some sweet bread. The two figured it would just be another day in their quiet small town. Dawn came in, running into the sheriff's office. It wasn't that far from her desk. The building was only 800 square feet. It had 2 jail cells in the basement. A basement that often flooded. Sheriff James and Deputy Garza rushed over to the grain silo. The silo is only 2 miles away, and they arrived quickly. Jeff escorts the sheriff and deputy to the west silo. A crowd had gathered outside the silo. A crowd of employees encircled the outside, but did not go inside the silo. As the sheriff and deputy arrived, the crowd dispersed. Sheriff James tells Deputy Garza to seal off the area. He also told him to look around the area for anything unusual. Sheriff James entered the silo. He saw the body next to the wall. This wasn't Sheriff James' first murder scene. He had been to many of them in his town of St. Anthony. But this was his first in Candy Water. Sheriff asked Deputy Garza to enter the silo. The sheriff asked Deputy Garza if he knew the victim. Deputy Garza walked over to the body. A fear came down his face. He recognized the body. It was Sarah Vila, a junior in high school. The sheriff patted his deputy on the shoulder, and they exited the silo. He asked the deputy to call the coroner and stay here at the scene. Sheriff James radios over to Dawn to get a hold of the sheriff in Christ Bay and make him aware of the situation. Sheriff James was making his way to the school. He needed to find out who her friends were and question them. If there was something Sheriff James knew about these cases, is that time is of the essence and never on his side. Sheriff James arrived at the school and quickly made his way to the principal's office. Principal Dan Diaz was in the office looking over some papers as Sheriff James walked in. He made him aware of the situation of Sarah Vila. Principal Diaz was shocked by the news. Sheriff James tells the principal to gather Sarah's friends in the library for questioning. 2 police officers from Cotton Town arrive at the Candy Water High School. Sheriff Jim Harris, the elected sheriff from Christ Bay, has the Department of Cotton Town to help Sheriff James. They make their way to the principal's office to introduce themselves to Sheriff James. He is glad that Sheriff Harris has sent back up. The sheriff needs it. He informs the officers to take Sarah's friends down to the sheriff's office once they have been retrieved. The officers agree and will notify the Sheriff James once they have them at the office. Sheriff James leaves the school and radios to Dawn at the office. He makes her aware of the incoming students and asks where he can find the parents of Sarah. Dawn radios back to Sheriff James and tells him the best bet is to find them at the Candy Water store and diner. Jim and Stacy Vila, the parents of Sarah, often stop by the diner before leaving to Christ Bay. The two work together at their law firm. Jim is a partner lawyer and Stacy is a paralegal at the firm. Every day before leaving town, they stop at the diner and have breakfast. Today was no different. Sheriff James walks into the diner and spots Jim and Stacy. He sits down next to them and greets them. They greet as well, and Sheriff James asked if they can step outside. The couple seemed confused by the sheriff's request, but they step outside with him. Sheriff James breaks the news, and the couple fall to their knees and cry from the news. The sheriff offers his condolences to the family. The couple are in disarray and can't think clearly. Sheriff James asked the delivery boy to follow him to the Villa residence. Sheriff James helps Jim and Stacy into their car and drives them home. Sheriff James helps them out of the car and into their house. He tells them he will be back shortly and go over some procedural arrangements. The delivery boy from the diner drives back the sheriff to the diner so he can pick up his car. Upon arriving back at his vehicle, Don radios Sheriff James that Sarah's friends have arrived at the office. At this point, the friends and public are unaware of Sarah's incident. Sheriff James arrives back at the office. Deputy Garza radios in that the coroner has arrived to pick up the body. Sheriff James tells Deputy Garza to come back to the office. Principal Diaz calls the sheriff's office and asks what he is to do about school. Sheriff James said it was up to him. He suggests that, should he make the announcement to have counselors available for the students. It would be a shock once the students know one of their own has passed. When Principal Diaz hangs up the phone, the school was currently in its third period class. For the boys it was math class, and it was their most hated class of all. They were in their study group, and spoke how it was weird today. They had seen the sheriff in the principal's office. What made it really weird was seeing the police from Cottontown taking kids out of school. The math class they were in had one window. It faced the other building that housed the science wing. Outside that window was a girl yelling and crying as she ran from the math wing over to the science wing. The math wing had the principal's office, and the science wing had the main exit. Everyone in class looked on in confusion and concern. Above the chalkboard was a speaker. The speaker that played the morning announcements and any announcements throughout the day. All announcements spoken came from the radio in the principal's office. There were only a handful of people that made announcements over the speaker. The most frequent speaker was the vice principal. After the girl ran across the building yelling, an announcement came over the speaker. It was Principal Diaz that made the following announcement to all grade levels. Good morning, everyone. This is Principal Diaz. It saddens me to say, but today we have lost a fellow student. I have decided to cancel the rest of the school day, as well as Friday's class. With that said, this will lead into your spring break. If any students need help in their grieving, counselors will be outside from now till Friday afternoon. The school buses are on the way, and we ask that everyone go home and stay safe. The school took on a somber mood. Each class was dismissed for the rest of the day and week. What were once loud hallways were quiet. Only the sound of feet walking on the ground could be heard. The 4 boys were exited that school had ended, but not the way that it did. The boys walked their way home. Ryan walked with them, and would stay at Joe Jr.'s home till his parents got home and picked him up. On the short walk back to the house, the boys were wondering who it could have been that got hurt. As the boys got down their street, they saw their dads outside. They were standing on the yard of Michael Gonzalez. The dad of Steve, Joe Sr., and Ray were huddled up and looking over to the Lance yard. The kids figured they were up to no good. "Hey, Junior, what you kids doing home this early?" Joe Sr. asked. "Hey, Dad," Principal Diaz said, "someone from school passed away. They let us out early and canceled school for the rest of the day and tomorrow," Joe Jr. says. The 3 dads looked at each other with concerned looks. Then they looked back at the 3 kids. Joe Sr. told the kids to go over his house and stay together. Steve Ray told their kids to stay over at Joe's house as well. Their attention was taken away from the Lance house, and they talked about what Joe Jr. had said. Joe Sr. told the other 2 he was going to call the sheriff and find out what was going on. Michael went into his house and grabbed the cordless phone. The 3 stood on Michael's porch as Joe Sr. called the sheriff. Dawn answered the phone when Joe called, and she told him there had been an accident involving a high school student. The sheriff was going to make an official announcement at 4 p.m. Joe related the info over to Ray and Michael. "A accident? What kind of accident?" Michael asked with concern and confusion. She didn't say. She did sound scared and nervous. I think something serious happened, Joe says. Yeah, I bet something serious happened all right. I bet I know exactly who did it too, Ray says as he turns towards the Lance house. The three stood on Michael's porch, looking over to the Lance house. The house that had dead grass and dead plants in a neighborhood with picture-perfect yards. Sirens could be heard in the background as the three men stared at the Lance house.
Thank you for stopping by and listening. Please, like, share and subscribe. Also please leave a comment. Once again thank you and we'll see you next week.